Hello and welcome to 6 Part. Today I'm gonna start a new series, What If Deku Had a Power of a Forgotten God, Part 1. If you enjoy this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
4-year-old Izuku Midoriya muttered, "I know that no one is born equal," as he stood in front of the hurt boy who was being picked on before he stepped in. His small body shook as he held up his shaking fists. He stood his ground with wide green eyes filled with fear. "But that doesn't mean you can use your quirk to hurt other people, Kachan." He yelled angrily, and his body language showed how scared he was. "Oi, Deku," a kid with ash blonde hair and red eyes said with a mean grin. The kid with red eyes said, "Who the hell do you think you are telling me what I can or can't do? Huh?" He hit one first with the other palm, and there was the sound of a small fireworks display in the strangely empty park. Izuku looked at his old friend and shook his head in shock. Katsuki Bakugo was never a particularly nice kid, but before his quirk showed up, he never went out of his way to hurt and put down other people. As of a few months ago, Katsuki has changed badly. He now never misses a chance to pick on someone with a weaker quirk than him or no quirk at all. Izuku was in the second group because his quirk hadn't shown up yet, but he wasn't going to do nothing while Katsuki used his gift to hurt other people. Izuku hated it the most when powerful people took advantage of weaker people. He wasn't old enough to put it into words, but Izuku was sure of it. People who have a quirk should only use it to help other people or make the world a better place in general. This is why he stood in front of the kid who had no defense, even though he had none himself. When he thought about it, Izuku knew he couldn't stand up to Katsuki and try to stop him from doing what he wanted to do. There were times when his brain told him to run away and leave the situation alone because it had nothing to do with him. But his heart and sense of what was right and wrong kept him from that. The kid needed help, and his morals told his heart to do so. His heart agreed, which made his brain move so that he could do what was right. This fat kid yelled at the fat kid from the sky, using his red bat wings to fly. "You are worthless." "Actually, he doesn't have any quirks, but it's pretty much the same," yelled the other kid, whose left hand's fingers were stretched out so far that they were longer than he was tall. Though he was shaking, Izuku clenched his teeth and stood his ground. "My quirk has yet to manifest, that's true. But if you use your quirks to harm others, then you don't deserve them." The two boys on either side of Katsuki glared at him, and the boy with the pale blonde hair twitched and turned his face into an angry, mean scowl. He yelled, "You are overreaching, Deku." And then he shot himself forward, followed by his staff. They hit Deku all over the body, making him cry out in pain as tears came out of the corners of his eyes. While this was going on, the kid Izuku was trying to keep safe quickly got up and ran away without looking back. When Izuku saw this, he felt sad that the kid had run away before asking for help, but he was glad that he was able to help him. That was the most important thing to him in the end. To be able to help other people. So he couldn't help but let his quirk show up so he could become a hero. He was still hopeful even though he was the only kid his age in town whose quirk hadn't shown up yet. In an instant, Izuku put his hands over his face and screamed in pain. His arms were burned from Katsuki's fist hitting his forearms instead of his face, which is what he had apparently meant to do. In spite of the pain and tears in his eyes, Izuku lowered his arms and gave Katsuki a mean look. Now that Izuku was hurting too much to be scared, he had the strength to stand up to Katsuki. It took Katsuki a moment to stand up because he felt something that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up and sent chills down his spine. When he looked down at Izuku, he saw him staring up at him from behind burned arms. Izuku was grunting and crying because the other two kids kept hitting him. His green eyes looked like steel. A very painful shot to Izuku's flank, on the other hand, made him close his eyes and scream in pain. Katsuki shook his head and glared at Izuku. He then cocked his fist back and smiled meanly. Izuku wished it would go away because he was in a lot of pain after getting hit in the liver. Even though he wanted to help, he didn't like pain of any kind. Like all normal kids his age, he knew that when the pain got too bad to handle, he should stop doing what was making it worse. Izuku couldn't get away because he was being punched all over and pinned down from all sides. But he didn't know that he didn't need to run away from the pain. Each hit made Izuku want the pain to stop even more, but no one there knew that under his clothes, His skin was slowly getting harder and darker. All but Izuku didn't see that because it was hidden by his burned and ruffled clothes. But Izuku could clearly feel how each hit was getting easier to handle and less painful. Their hits aren't very strong, and Kachan's explosions feel like normal punches, though warmer. Is this my quirk? Izuku was amazed and happy, but he screamed in pain when he was hit again with the same amount of force. What? Not at all. Come back. His pleas for his quirk to come back went unanswered, and he had to go through another beating at the hands of Katsuki and his lackeys. The person who was beating him up kept doing it without seeming to notice anything odd. Due to the pain and number of hits, Izuku Midoriya finally lost consciousness. At that very moment, he was sure he felt his quirk activating. When he woke up, he had a painful smile on his face because he thought he was finally done being weird. After a short time, Katsuki and his friends stopped hitting Izuku while he was unconscious. He sneered and spat next to the still body of the person he thought wasn't worth the air he was breathing and was just a waste of space. Then he turned around and walked away. His two lackeys were bragging to each other about how badly they beat Izuku while laughing. You should just give up. You can't get a quirk, the doctor told the child and his mother as he stared at them with what looked like boredom. Inko Midoriya's eyebrow twitched in anger at how rudely the doctor had said something that might have broken her son's spirit. They looked at each other, and she felt better when she saw that he was more confused than anything else, even though he couldn't say anything. He told her that he hurt himself when he fell at the park while he was playing, so she took him to the doctor to get treatment. While they were there, they looked into why his quirk hasn't shown up yet. Is there something wrong with him, doctor? Other kids his age have already shown their quirks, but my Izuku is the only one in his kindergarten who hasn't yet. She asked, her voice sharp at first but worried as she went on. The doctor said after a moment. You are a fourth generation, if I'm not mistaken, right madam? I am, of course, speaking in terms of quirk. When Inko nodded and moved her fingers around, the All Might figurine that had been sitting on her son's lap floated over to her. Yes. I can attract small objects to me and manipulate them a bit, she said. Her face got a little darker, and her eyebrow twitched again in anger. And my dear husband can breathe fire. Inko loved Izuku's father, Hisashi, but she was mad at how often he took jobs abroad and only came home for about 2 months a year. The doctor said, yes, and pointed to an X-ray of Izuku's left foot. The norm for a quirk to manifest is 4 years old at the most. Your son has already reached that age a few months ago and he has yet to manifest his quirk. If you take a look at this, you can see that your son has 2 joints on his pinky toe. As quirks began to manifest in people, the presence of a second joint in the pinky toe has been proven to be absent in those who have developed quirks. This means that the chance for your son to develop a quirk even as a late bloomer, of which there have been a few cases throughout history, is less than 0, he said bluntly. Inko resisted the urge to throw the All Might figurine at him. Instead, she just gave him a mean look for ruining her son's dreams in such a rude way. Even though he didn't have a quirk, she turned to her Izuku to tell him that everything would be okay and that she loved him very much. But her eyes got bigger when she saw her normally calm and polite son glaring angrily at the doctor as well. Wow, it looks like he got more than just her good looks from her. You are lying, he yelled with a fury she had never seen from him before. He paused for a moment, and Inko's eyes got even bigger when she saw the guilty look on his face before he turned to face the doctor. These injuries weren't the result of me falling while I was playing. A kid that had no quirk like me was being bullied by other kids with quirks. When I stepped up to help him, they focused on me and beat me up. When that was happening, I for a moment felt their hits weakening. Even Kachan's explosive punches only felt warm against my skin for that moment. That had to be my quirk. He was looked at by the doctor for a moment before he shook his head. That's not possible. I promise you that you were just dreaming, he said without any concern. Inko quickly stood up, grabbed Izuku's hand, and gently pulled him off his chair. She was already sick of his bad behavior. She said, that's enough, doctor. Thank you for your time. I'll leave your payment with your secretary at the front door. She then bowed a little. She left the doctor's office with her son by her side. Izuku turned around and glared at the doctor as he was being dragged away. For a split second, the doctor looked straight at Izuku, and he felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Everything went back to normal when the mother and son went behind the door, which was locked with more force than was necessary. The doctor shook his head at the strange event and went back to his work. The doctor was so eager to get rid of them that he didn't notice that the X-ray pictures were a little darker than they should have been. Inko asked Izuku, "Why did you lie to me about how you got hurt in the park?" She wasn't being mean, but her tone made Izuku know that he would feel bad if he lied to her again when they got home. Izuku stumbled for a moment and then looked down at his feet. Izuku told the truth, I didn't want Kachan and the other to get in trouble. He didn't like the Katsuki Bakugo who didn't have a quirk as much as he hated the Katsuki Bakugo who did. Because of the good times they had together, he didn't want to hurt his old friend. Inko sighed with relief as she knelt down in front of her son and wrapped her arms around him. She could see the anger in his eyes and remembered the kind of relationship he used to have with Katsuki. Being so noble is something worth admiring, Izuku, but if you don't let Bakugo-kun learn that his bad actions have bad consequences, then he is never going to learn that what he is doing is wrong. And if he doesn't learn that soon, then he will eventually mess with someone that is not going to take his bullying, someone that will strike back harder than even he could handle. Izuku looked up at his mother as she spoke, and as he thought about what she said, he nodded to show that he understood and agreed. Even though he was young, Izuku was smart enough to understand what she said. There was a moment when he wished he could be the one to teach Katsuki how wrong his ways were, but he decided to just let him be because he couldn't control his own quirk and wasn't interested in becoming friends with him again. Katsuki would learn in the end if his mother was right. He only hoped that when that time came, it wouldn't spell disaster for him for good. When Inko saw that she had helped her son understand, she smiled, even though it was clear that it was hard for her. Katsuki was being mean, and Izuku didn't want to punish him. But Inko looked at it very differently. It looked like she was going to talk to Mitsuku soon. She remembered to do that soon and turned her attention to something else she wanted to talk to her son about. Earlier, you insisted that your quirk had developed even though the esteemed doctor said otherwise, using the results of your test as proof. She asked him to explain without actually asking him to. For her part, Inko fully believed her son when he said he had finally developed his quirk. Izuku wasn't lying, and she knew that her son wouldn't joke about quirks or being a hero. That meant her son could not have been lying when he said that his quirk came about. It didn't matter what a jerk doctor said. People who had quirks had 2 joints in their pinky toes, so who was he to say for sure that Izuku couldn't get one when he himself had 2 joints in his? She thought that Izuku getting a quirk, even though all signs pointed to it being impossible, was more likely than it not happening just because he said it wouldn't. Izuku's eyes got brighter, and he smiled and made little fists with his hands. I don't really know what my quirk can do, but I definitely felt it. When Kachan and the others were hitting me, I felt their punches starting to lose power, and in Kachan's case his explosive punches only felt warm, just a bit stronger than the others. He stopped for a moment before smirking. The weird thing is that it only lasted for a few seconds before it went away, and it didn't come back no matter I wished for it to so. With a nod, Inko showed that she understood, then she stood up and smiled at him. That's because you went about it the wrong way. Wishing for your quirk to work is not going to make it work. To use your quirk, you must recreate both what you were feeling and what you were thinking the moment it activated. For example, when I use my quirk, I don't think, attract it to me, but rather, I want it here. Your quirk is a part of you, and as such, you must use it as if it was your legs when you were walking, instead of how you use your fingers when deliberately want to grab something. Did you get that? Izuku gave a nod. His first thought was, yeah. He then closed his eyes and thought about how he felt when his quirk started to work. He remembered very well. Katsuki and his friends beat him up so badly that it hurt more than anything he had felt before. He remembered being glad that he was being attacked and not the other kid who had no defense, and feeling good about doing the right thing. He remembered blocking Kachan's punch and staring at him in defiance. When they looked at each other, he could feel and see that Kachan was uncomfortable. Then he remembered getting shot in the kidney and how badly it hurt. He wished the pain would go away. The punches he was getting started to hurt less and less at that very moment. After hearing his mother's explanation, Izuku knew what he had to do. He focused on remembering how badly he hurt and how badly he wanted the pain to leave him, never to return. Izuku, hearing his mother's voice, which was filled with joy, made him open his eyes. She was grinning ear to ear and pointing at his hands with great joy. He looked down at them at chest level and gasped with joy when he saw that they were covered in something black that sparkled. It reached from his little fingertips to just above his wrist. He noticed that the black substance was going away as he lost focus, but now that he knew how it felt, he was able to quickly get it back and it stopped going away into his fingertips. He looked at his hands and said, "Whoa." He opened and closed them, expecting to face some kind of resistance because the black substance that was now covering them looked very strong. He felt nothing like that, but his eyes got bigger. In fact, he felt exactly the same as usual, except that he could feel something. Energy like going from all over his body to the matter that was now covering his hands. It looks like some kind of weapon, Inko thought as she looked at her son's hands, which were shiny and black. As soon as Izuku used his quirk, the hairs on the back of her neck and the arms stood up. She tried to ignore the feeling. More than the cool and smooth-looking black substance on his hands made it look like there was something going on. Izuku slowly nodded his head and kept flexing his hands in amazement. "Yeah, but I can feel this energy going from all over my body to keep this armament up. I think that my quirk isn't the black thing on top of my head, but the energy that keeps it up. I wonder." He lost his train of thought when the energy suddenly stopped. As he watched the blackness fade back into his fingertips and then disappear completely, he fell to the ground in exhaustion. She laughed out loud as she looked at her son, who was overly panting. It looks like if you use it for too long you will tire, and you won't be able to use it until the energy you talked about replenishes again," she said. Even so, Izuku nodded his head. He then took a moment to catch his breath. He stood up slowly. It feels like I was running away from Kachan and the others," he said in a confused voice as he swayed back and forth. He shook his head and got his attention back. He sat up straight and looked at his hands. "I can feel the energy used to call up the armament beginning to fill back up slowly. I wonder what I can do to increase the amount I have and how fast it replenishes. Also, what else can I do with this energy?" Inko made another note in her mind. This time, it was about getting Izuku to stop muttering out loud, since she knew that other people might find it annoying. If only he knew how annoying it was for her when his dad did it. "When you used your weapon, I felt tense, like I was watching a scary movie and knew something bad was going to happen. Maybe you can project that energy to scare people or something like that," she suggested. When Izuku nodded to show that she understood, she went on. "However, since we know you can create some kind of armor, I believe the best thing for now will be for you to learn how to fight and increase your physical abilities in general. You will learn more about your quirk as you grow." Izuku enthusiastically nodded his head with a big smile on his face. Yes. There was a time when neither Izuku nor his mother thought that his strange power could be anything other than a quirk. Izuku's power could be trained in this way because, at the end of the day, it was still a power that changed the physical world. This meant that normal mental and physical training could affect its growth. Even so, Izuku's power wasn't a quirk. It was a lot more than that. A child's pure desire to gain power and become a hero who protected others was the only thing that made it appear out of nowhere. Because of that well-known saying, the world can be changed by just one man's will. It was both interesting and helpful for Izuku Midoriya over the next 10 years. He thought it was great that he could learn as much as possible about his quirk. His strange habit, which he named Hockey Ambition, in a flash of inspiration, was very strong because of how it worked and what it did. Hockey gave him 3 abilities. It covered his body in a black substance that made him much stronger and also worked like armor. It let him sense everything around him as long as he focused on all 5 of his senses at the same time while channeling the power that ran through his body. And when he projected his power outside of his body, he could control others to scare, intimidate, or just knock them out. He named his quirk, Wish with all his might, because he had to really wanted to do what he wanted it to do in order to use it. For example, he had to really believe that he would not get hurt no matter what in order to use the first part of his quirk, which he called armament. At the same time, he had to think that his physical strength would increase. In the beginning, it was a little hard for him to do, but after years of practice, it was easy for him. Also, armament wasn't just something that was on his skin. It turned into everything that looked like it had armament on it. This was the reason why it made him stronger and better at defense at the same time. He called the ability to sense everything around him, mantra. To do this, he had to focus on his sight, hearing, smell, touch, and even taste, while sending energy through his body all the time. He could pick up on everything within 1,000 feet when he was concentrating on it alone. His passive range was only 100 feet, and no matter how much he trained, he couldn't make it longer. In any case, he only didn't know what was going on around him when he was sleeping. After 10 years of practicing and getting better at using his quirk, he subconsciously kept sending his energy through his body all the time. No matter how much he trained, he could not use mantra while doing anything else that required conscious thought. To finally use King's Will, which meant projecting his energy outside of his body to scare, intimidate, or knock someone out, he had to almost forcefully pull his energy out of his body while focusing on his goal. This part of his quirk had two problems. The stronger the person who received it, the more energy he had to use to make it work, and the more he used it, the weaker and less effective his other two parts would be until he restored the energy he lost when activating King's Will. After Izuku was able to consciously bring out his quirk, his mother enrolled him in a dojo that taught different kinds of martial arts that would work better with his quirk. Armament made it possible for him to learn Muay Thai, Judo, and Tae Kwon Do, which are the best types of martial arts. The good news is that he could learn all three of them at the same time because the dojo taught mixed martial arts. After 10 years of hard work and dedication, he had earned a black belt in all three martial arts. He was also surprisingly good at them naturally, so he could use moves from all three when fighting. Master at the dojo suggested that mantra start meditating to get stronger and get used to how many things he could see. He did this after telling them what he could do. He found that training both his mind and body made him have more energy faster. Because of this, Izuku also put the same amount of effort into his studies, which made his mother very happy because she was afraid that his formal education would suffer because he was so focused on developing his quirk. And finally, he trained King's Will with the help of animals in the park that didn't want to help and people in the dojo who did want to help. This taught him that the amount of power he needed for King's Will to work depended on how strong the target's will was. It was easier to scare, or knock out a cat or dog than it was to scare another kid his age. When doing it to an adult, it was the same as when doing it to a child his age. Because he now had a quirk, and it was a very strong one, Izuku's behavior changed a lot. But Izuku changed for the better, while Katsuki changed for the worse. He still wanted to be a hero and help people who couldn't help themselves. He was still that good kid who never held a grudge and did whatever it took to help everyone be the best version of themselves. What had changed about him instead was his mood and attitude. He was very sure of himself and what he could do because of how well he did in school, in martial arts, and with his quirk. He didn't have as many nervous breakdowns, and it took a lot to scare or intimidate him. This was probably a side effect of using King's Will so much. This was because of his quirk and the work he had to do to train it. If he wasn't careful, he could also be stubborn and headstrong. First, everyone thought Izuku didn't have a quirk because of how it worked and the fact that he didn't brag about it. People still think he doesn't have one. At the dojo, Izuku made rules about how and when to use his quirk. These rules said, 1. Fighting just for the sake of fighting is illegal, unless it's for sparring to practice techniques or to protect himself from unprovoked harm. 2. Never use the techniques you learned against people who can't defend themselves. 3. Be the shield for people who can't protect themselves. And 4. If necessary, become the sword that kills the wicked with extreme prejudice. Izuku had to be very quiet when he used his quirk because of this. He wore armor under his clothes to protect himself from people who tried to hit him. When they hit something that felt like steel, they hurt themselves. Izuku never got caught off guard because he used mantra passively. If someone tried to pick on someone weaker than them while he was nearby, they became scared of their shadow and ran away. They knew Izuku had some kind of quirk because of this, but they didn't know what it was. Katsuki was the only one who didn't believe it. He insisted that he would only believe it after Izuku showed it to everyone else. And Izuku refused to do it because it went against his code of conduct about his abilities. That always made Katsuki mad, and he still thought Izuku was a worthless, crazy, or delusional kid who was learning martial arts to make up for something he wasn't meant to do. Due to his intense anger and dislike for Izuku, he was unable to see all the signs that Izuku had a quirk, even though he was naturally smart and observant. Either that or he just wouldn't admit it. Izuku didn't care what Katsuki thought. The explosion quirk user was just someone Izuku couldn't stand because he was mean, controlling, annoying, and nasty. He did not like that and the fact that Katsuki was not afraid to use his quirk to hurt other people on a whim. Izuku didn't hate him, but he couldn't stand him, so he just did what he had to do to stay out of his way. But he wouldn't put up with his nonsense when a fight was about to happen. Since Izuku was 10 years old, the only bad thing that has really happened to him is that his parents split up. After his mother got tired of his dad being away from the house more than he was there, she made it official and permanent. It was only Inko and Izuku at home, and the thought of her ex-husband made her angry, so she didn't want to talk about the fights they had when he was there. In the end, they should have ended things before they said or did something they would want to take back. Izuku didn't care too much about that because he didn't know his father very well. He was just happy that the man who made his mother so mad was no longer in their lives. Izuku was 14 years old at this point, and he was getting more and more excited as time went on. He had less than a year to go before he could apply for UA in high school. He planned to put most of his attention on his studies in martial arts during these years in order to make his quirk stronger and more useful, since he has pretty much mastered it after 10 years of trying it out and seeing what works and what doesn't. Izuku really believed that this year would be the same as the last few, even though he would be studying and working out even more. But he was very wrong, because something happened that will make his life even more different. Something that will help him become the greatest and strongest hero ever. The third grade teacher waved a stack of papers around and said, "Okay, listen up. Now that you're all in third grade, it's time to think about your future." He had a huge smile on his face. As he threw the stacks of paper into the air, his smile turned dreamy. "I will now hand out your career aspiration documents, but at least, for the most part, you all want to be heroes, right?" The students in his class cheered loudly as each person showed off their unique trait. One boy who stood out had black hair that was curly and spiky and had green highlights that, strangely enough, matched the color of his eyes. Izuku Midoriya was this person. He had the best grades in class, and people were still arguing about whether he had a quirk or not. He was writing quietly in his notebook while ignoring the noise going on around him. It looked like he did this all the time. Izuku was tall for his Aegea, just a few inches short of 6 feet, and that was both because he worked out almost every day and because he was born that way. Only because of the first one did he not look like a stick. Although Izuku's uniform mostly hid it, anyone who looked at him could tell that he was very muscular without being too so. His body was a bit bigger than that of an Olympic swimmer, but he wasn't a huge, lumbering mass of muscles. He had the right amount of strength and speed. It makes me think of Scott Adkins from the Undisputed movies. Izuku's face was narrow because he had just the right amount of fat for his health. The freckles on his cheeks stood out more on his cheekbones because of this. When he was calm, like right now, his eyes would stay that round shape. But when he was angry or focused, they would get so narrow that it looked like their shape had changed. Izuku wasn't very plain, but his face wasn't that of a male model either. His looks were kind of nice, as many people would say. Well, I know that most of you have good quirks, but bear in mind that using them outside of sanctioned establishments when you are a minor and don't have a hero license, said the teacher gently. Katsuki Bakugo laughed meanly as he sat at his desk with his feet propped up. "Sir, don't believe for a second that I am the same as everyone else here. It isn't my intention to be seen as the same as those with weak quirks." With a frown, Izuku shook his head and went back to writing in his notebook. His eyes briefly met his head. The only thing that had changed about Katsuki was that everything that made him Katsuki was 10 times better. Eventually and thankfully, he had grown out of his worse habits, but he was still a very bad person. "What do you mean by that, Katsuki? Shut up, fodder, behave as such." The teacher woke up. "Ah, yes. Bakugo-kun. You are going to apply to UA High School, yes?" Izuku stopped writing and looked at Katsuki. He put his pen down next to his notebook as he did this. "What? The best school for heroes in all Japan. It takes a total score of 79 to enter this year, right? And if that isn't enough, the entrance examination is the most difficult one too." Bakugo laughed when he saw that everyone had stopped staring at him for saying that they were food and were now staring at him with wide, scared eyes. "It's not a surprise that people like you are shaking at the mention of UA High School. I will do great on the entrance exams. I am the only one here who deserves to go there," he yelled, standing up and throwing his desk and chair to the floor. Continuing to yell, he had a mean grin on his face. I will even surpass All Might, and then, I will become the highest ranked hero of all. I'll leave my name forever in the annual ranking of the richest people in the world. When Katsuki made his statement, everyone there looked at him with wide eyes. But Izuku just raised an eyebrow and shook his head in frustration. He took out his pencil to start writing again. He was making plans for the routine he would follow for 10 months to get ready for the US test of admission. Since it was Friday, he had 2 more days to do it while just working out like he always did. On Monday, he could start a stricter and more demanding routine. Now that we are talking about it, I believe that Midoriya-kun also wishes to enter UA. Izuku stopped moving when the teacher spoke and there was a sudden silence. It didn't surprise him when he looked up and saw that his classmates were having mixed feelings. Few people there were sure that Izuku didn't have some kind of quirk, but everyone else did. No one knew if it was strong enough to get him into UA. In addition, Izuku got the best grades and the best physical scores on the school's tests, which made everyone there not sure how to react to the news. Okay. Everyone except Katsuki yelled, "Deku!" as he walked over to Izuku's desk and raised his brightly glowing hand above his head. This caused Izuku's desk to explode, along with the notebook he had been writing in the whole time. "You good for no?" Izuku rudely cut Katsuki off when he reached down and grabbed his wrist before it could go below the height of his head while he was sitting. Katsuki was shocked when the explosion came out of his hand. The ball of fire and smoke landed safely on top of everyone's head. Katsuki clenched his teeth in pain as Izuku tightened the grip on his wrist and glared at him disapprovingly as he held him down. He firmly told Bakugo, as the teacher just said, "We are not allowed to use our quirks outside of approved locations." "That goes double for you, Bakugo, considering how volatile your quirk is." He then let go of Katsuki's wrist. Izuku clenched his teeth and glared at Katsuki. "Our quirks? You don't even have a quirk, you stupid nerd? Martial arts is the only thing you've got and that ain't gonna make the cut, and yet you are insulting me by trying to compete in the same league as me, huh?" Izuku turned his head away. "I do have a quirk. Whether you feel insulted or not about me applying for UA is none of my concern, nor the fact that I am applying should be of yours for that matter," he said calmly. Izuku could feel Katsuki's anger in his eyes as he glared at him. "What do you mean by that?" He replied, "That you shouldn't use your stronger quirk to try to scare others into not trying to go further than you out of fear of having your huge and fragile pride hurt when you eventually find out that there are people with a much stronger quirk than yours." His tone was calm, but there was a bit of humor in it as well. As Katsuki growled at Izuku, an artery beat in his forehead. "What are you implying, you shitstain?" The bell that rang to mark the end of that period and the beginning of morning recess chose that exact moment to sound. Izuku let out a sigh, and then he stood up with a shake of his head. He quickly put down his food and picked up his notebook. During that moment, he noticed that his classmates and teacher had pushed themselves against the farthest wall of the classroom to avoid the argument. They did this because they knew that anyone too close to them could get hurt during the argument. It made him laugh, and he laughed again as he started to walk toward the door. He said, "I'm not implying anything," and then he grabbed the door handle, slid it open, walked out, and shut it behind him without looking back. After a few steps, he let out a tired, irritated sigh when he heard an explosion and a roar of anger. He kept walking toward the cafeteria, knowing that there was nothing he could do about it. He was hungry and still needed to plan out 3/4 of his routine. "No. Stop that thief!" When everyone turned to see what was making the noise, they saw a muddy piece that looked like a person with eyes and sharp teeth running away with a purse in his hand. He laughed, and his voice sounded as gross as he looked. "Catch me if you can." A pale, sunken-faced man with blonde hair walked out of a nearby grocery store and began to assess the situation. "Someone is coming to deal with that dude, right? He is just taking advantage of how busy mornings are to get away with what he wants. People who abuse their quirks are everywhere." The already very skinny man's height and muscle mass suddenly grew as he changed, and he smiled. "No need to worry. Why, you ask? Because I am here." When everyone turned around to look at the voice, their eyes grew wide with shock and amazement. "Holy shit. No fucking way, it's a The fight this morning with that sludge bad guy happened on the way I usually go home. The event should be clear now, since it's been a few hours." Izuku thought to himself as he looked at his phone, "I don't want to miss my daily run." He locked his screen with a nod of his head and put it in his pocket. After that, He got up from his chair, put his backpack on his back, and started walking toward the classroom door. "Oi, Deku. Where the fuck do you think you are going, huh? I have unfinished business with you." Izuku stopped and looked at Katsuki. He saw that he was following him aggressively. People who didn't leave for home yet and were still in the classroom began to move away as they raised an eyebrow. Izuku huffed in anger, which he used to boost a weak king's will on purpose to scare him and make him look angry. "And I don't have to waste on those business of yours." Katsuki stepped back, turned pale, and shook before he caught himself. "What the fuck? What's the point of pulling away from Deku? Everyone?" He yelled to himself in his head as he stared in shock. As was always the case with him, anger began to rise. He didn't want to believe that he had a quirk. He never made good use of it. He had many chances to show it off, but he never did. In Katsuki's case, someone who didn't use their quirk was either lying or felt bad about how useless it was. As soon as Izuku saw his chance to leave without wasting any more time, he gave his old friend a tight nod. He only said, "Good day," and then he quickly left the room so Katsuki wouldn't have any more time to waste. A few seconds after crossing the school's gate, he heard the angry shout and explosion, which made him smile. While he was moving toward his head, Izuku thought about how far he had come in planning his training. His goal for the next 10 months was to get more energy so that he could use all 3 parts of his quirk more effectively and for longer periods of time. He also wanted to make his body faster and stronger without using his quirk, so that when he used armament, those abilities would get even better. Luckily, he was able to do all of that by training harder and longer, as well as by studying new ideas and meditating more. Sad to say, he had to give up reading comics and playing video games if he wanted to have time to do something useful in the next 10 months. But he was ready and willing to make those sacrifices because he wanted to reach his goals. Izuku got to his home, which was at the top of a building that was an apartment complex, and used his own set of keys to get into his simple home. As he took off his shoes and walked to his room, he said, "I'm home." "Welcome back, honey. I'm in the kitchen," his mother yelled from where she said she was. Just before he went into his room and shut the door behind him, he yelled back to say, "Hello." Because both his mother and his martial arts teachers taught him good manners, his room was neither too big nor too small. It was also very clean and well organized. Not even the many posters of his favorite heroes that were all over the room made it look messy. He put his phone to charge because he knew he would need the extra power for the next few hours. He then put his backpack on top of his desk next to his laptop. After taking off his uniform, he put it in the sink to show his mother that it needed to be washed. Izuku didn't wait for a second before going into his closet and getting one of the many sets of workout clothes he had. At that time of year, summer, he wore a hooded shirt with no sleeves, running shorts, and shoes that went above his ankles. Izuku then left his room and went to the kitchen, where he saw his mother sitting at the kitchen table and typing on her own laptop. There were papers all around her. When she got divorced and got a lot of money, she looked into different investment plans so she could support herself and her son without her ex-husband's help. She didn't want him in their lives anymore at that point. She had been very successful with her plans, and now she had enough money that she wouldn't have to worry about it again. She could also spend a lot of it without giving it much thought. In any case, neither she nor Izuku wanted expensive things or a fancy way of life. They were happy just buying what they needed and doing the things they enjoyed, like Izuku's hobbies of collecting hero items, playing video games, and joining the local gym, and Inko's hobbies of watching movies, reading books, and buying the newest clothes. Inko wasn't vain, but she liked to feel pretty because she was a woman and didn't want a partner. This was also the reason she had a membership at the nearby gym and went there often. Inko hadn't changed much in the last 10 years because of this. Heck, if you ask someone who knew her back then, they would say she was even more beautiful now. He said, "Hey Mom," in a casual voice as he quickly walked to the fridge to get a special drink that would help him get the most out of his exercising. While making his drink, he gave her laptop a nod in the direction of the ceiling. "What are you working on over there?" Inko waved her hand over her head in a light way. "Nothing much. I'm just comparing the income of Mitsuki's clothing shop from this year with the one from last year. I also need to check the current income and predictions of future incomes of the companies and business I have actions in, and that is going to take me what's rest of the afternoon, so that means we are probably going to have to order something for dinner." Izuku's eyes got bright. He asked with hope, "Can we get katsudon from Murayama's?" That was his favorite food, and Murayama's had the best in town by a long shot. Also, he hasn't had any in almost 2 weeks. He needed his fix right away. When Inko saw this, she laughed and rolled her eyes. "Yes, we can, Izuku," she said without much thought. Even though she liked curry better, they had that a few days ago, and she had to agree that Murayama's katsudon was delicious. What is that red drink?" She asked her son as he drank it. He said it helped him with his workouts. "How was your day at school?" Izuku smacked his lips together as he finished his drink, enjoying the light strawberry taste of it. You know, same old, same old. Had to spend the whole day switching between meditating and listening to the teachers talk about things I already know," he said irritably. As he went on, a muscle on his cheek and forehead twitched in anger, making her lips twitch. And Bakugo was as charming as always today. "Man, it's getting harder and harder not to use my quirk to smack him in the face. But that would be against his code, so I couldn't do that. I told Mitsuki about it, but she's not too worried. Bakugo-kun may act that way at school, but she keeps a tight rein on him at home. He doesn't pick on other people with anything other than words anymore, and no one can deny that he really wants to be a hero. It might be for selfish reasons, but that's better than turning into a villain. God forbid," she said, shaking at the thought of Katsuki Bakugo turning into a bad guy with a power like his. Izuku agreed with a simple nod. He could agree with that. He is still annoying though. That temper and mouth of his are going to get him in trouble eventually, he said sure. Izuku's rules were the only reason he hadn't given Katsuki the worst beating possible. If not, he would have put the fiery blonde on his place a long time ago. That's because of the ridiculous number of hormones going through his body right now, she joked. When her answer was silence, she looked up and saw Izuku giving her a raised eyebrow. This made her laugh. Don't even think of you comparing yourself to him on that matter. While you are the same age, the number of mental and control exercises you put yourself through every day make it only so your body is affected by those hormones. And don't let me get started on the effects of you working out. And that was what Inko said. Even though she was his mother, she wasn't ashamed to say that her son was good looking. When she got together with her friends, they always brought it up. They both knew that he was going to have to use a stick to scare girls away soon. Izuku turned red when his mother gave him a sharp, appreciative look, and he coughed into his fist. Yeah. Okay. Speaking of working out, next morning I'm going to up the intensity of my routine. I only have 10 months before I can apply for UA and I need to prepare as much as I can. Soa. Inko laughed and nodded to show that he got it. Starting Monday, I'll make sure that all of your meals fit in with your new routine. I know you're going to work on speed and strength, right? She asked, turning back to her computer to make a note of that. Yep, Izuku shrugged. Thanks, Mom. You're the best. I'll see you when I get back from my run, he told her as he hugged her hard stomach. He did that, and she laughed. When he knelt down to kiss the top of her head, she blinked with joy. Izuku went back to his room to get his phone and the breathing mask that was made just for him. He put his mask on top of his head and around his lower face and ears. Then he put his phone on his right bicep in the same way. He loved this mask because it had speakers built in that let him connect to his phone via Bluetooth and listen to his favorite music while he worked out. After leaving his house, he stretched for a while when he got to the street and then began a slow jog while pulling the hood of his zip-up shirt over his head. He had been running for about 40 minutes, and even though he was drenched in sweat, Izuku wasn't tired, his muscles weren't hurting, and he wasn't breathing hard. While that was mostly because of his amazing stamina, which he has been working on for 10 years, it was also because of the drink he had while talking to his mother and the breathing mask that let him take in more oxygen with each breath. You could also say that he was having a great time running while listening to Eminem's "Till I Collapse." He was thinking about what else he could add to his workout routine and his quirk. For example, he was wondering why his passive range with mantra was automatically cut down to 80 feet whenever he listened to music through the speakers on his breathing mask. It was likely that because that part of his quirk used all 5 of his senses, cutting off one of them from the outside world made it 20% less useful right away. It made sense to think that way. He would have to play around with that some more in the future. That might have been the first step in the right direction toward making mantra's passive range bigger. That Izuku could see 10 times as much as the person in front of him was enough to keep him from getting caught off guard in battle, but the wider his field of vision, the more time he had to react to what he saw. Izuku was walking through a tunnel and had just passed a closed sewer entrance when he stopped all of a sudden because he could feel something moving very quickly going into his narrow field of vision right below him. Just 5 seconds had passed when all of a sudden, a gross brownish-green sludge started to rise from the cracks in the sewer entrance lid. "What the?" he muttered, but his mask made it hard to hear. The slime clumped together into a gross mass that almost reached the tunnel ceiling. Izuku could make out yellow eyes and a wide mouth full of sharp teeth. A medium-sized invisibility cloak was enough to give him the slip. It said in a voice that was just as gross as it looked. It saw Izuku for the first time, and its yellow eyes lit up with joy as it grinned mean eyes. It spoke in a creepy way, "Oh, what a wonderful body you have," before sludge tentacles shot forward clearly meant to grab him. Izuku ducked under the first one and jumped back to avoid getting grabbed by the second one. The sudden movement caused his hood to fall off his head. He slid into his fighting stance and glared at the gross thing in front of him. He fought with his right hand, so his left flank faced his opponent. His right arm was bent at the elbow and cocked back, and his right fist was at the same level as his head. He had his left arm stretched out in front of him, palm down, ready to block, parry, or grab any attack. Finally, his legs were a little wider than his shoulders, and his knees were slightly bent. He was ready to move at any time. This was the first move in his own style, which was a mix of Muay Thai, Tae Kwon and Judo. Based on how he looks, this is probably the small time thief who caused the trouble this morning, Izuku thought as he looked at his opponent. While he is standing still, I know he can move very quickly. This probably means that he can only move at that speed for short periods of time. On top of that, I'm quick enough to easily avoid his tentacle attacks. I should be able to stay safe until a pro hero comes to deal with him if I keep my distance. The way it sounds makes me think that he won't let me go free. The sludge villain said with a hint of irritation, "Don't try to fight me, kid. I'm just going to take over your body. I promise you it will only hurt for about 45 seconds before you can't feel anything else." He then sent many tentacles at Izuku with the goal of wrapping them around him to bring him closer so he could start taking over his body. Luckily, the boy had a quirk that made him strong enough to fight him. But Izuku had other ideas. Izuku used the almost complete awareness that mantra gave him to plan his attacks. He knew where each tentacle was, what angle it would come from, where it was supposed to hit him, and how fast it would come. He knew that wasn't enough to stop them because his body had to be able to respond quickly to what his mind was thinking. But that didn't matter this time because Izuku was quick enough to do it with such ease it was almost insulting. Toshinori Yagi, or as he was better known as All Might, was impressed and a little shocked when he came out of the sewers and saw a teen who couldn't be more than 15 avoiding the attacks of a bad guy who had gotten away from him, the current #1 hero, with a grace and control of movement that he had rarely seen before. He noticed that the boy's green eyes were fixed on the sludge bad guy's main body. He isn't looking at the tentacles, but he always avoids them, All Might thought as he watched the teen flip over a tentacle that tried to hit his legs under him. The teen then fell into a handstand, where he flexed his elbows and tucked his knees into his stomach to avoid another sludge tentacle that reached for his feet. After that, he shot his arms into the air and did a barrel roll to avoid 2 more tentacles without looking at them. It might be some kind of perception quirk. That would also explain why his body looks better in shape than mine did when I got One for All. That means this kid is smart enough to figure out how to make his quirk look better. That was all he needed to know in less than 10 seconds. He cursed himself for wasting time on new, talented people when he still had work to do. All Might didn't want to put a civilian's safety at risk, so he decided to let everyone know he was there and finish the job he started this morning. He yelled, "I am here," and let out a sigh of relief when the sludge bad guys stopped looking at the boy and turned to him. The sludge villain yelled, "You," and then sent out a tentacle of sludge that was a bit stronger and faster than the ones he had been using against Izuku. Izuku, by the way, was just standing there staring at All Might with his arms hanging at his sides. All Might quickly ducked under the attack, not caring about the small pieces that hit his back when it hit the tunnel floor. He made the necessary changes by cocking his fist back so that what he did next wouldn't hurt the boy he had just saved. He swung his fist forward and said, "Texas." The wind pressure was high enough that it could be seen. Smash. Izuku braced himself as All Might's attack sent strong winds whirling around him. He couldn't take his eyes off the wind pressure that was slightly aimed upwards so it wouldn't hit him and hurt him, but it did, basically breaking down the sludge villain like it was nothing. Soon, it was over, and he still couldn't move as he watched in awe as All Might, the #1 hero and his idol, used an empty bottle to pick up the rest of the sludge villain's body, including the part with the eyes and mouth. "Hey, young man. Are you alright?" When All Might spoke directly to Izuku, he woke up from his dream. He looked up at him for a moment, admiring his famous, fearless grin before he could think of what to say. And he said, yes, I'm fine, All Might. You showed up right on time, just like you always do." The praise and worship came out naturally, as he looked up at the stars. All Might laughed out loud. Izuku gushed. He posed with the sludge villain's bottles in his hands and smiled, his teeth sparkling from the sun now that they were outside the tunnel. "If that's the case, then I'm glad. I'm sorry I got you involved with that bad guy. I don't usually make rookie mistakes like that. But, in any case, you were a huge help. Thank you. I was able to capture him safely. He's still really cool, even though he looks very different in real life." Izuku thought with admiration, his eyes still full of stars. "Shit. I'm about to reach my limit in a few seconds. I need to leave now," Toshinori thought as he put the 2 bottles with the defeated bad guy in them into the pockets of his cargo pants. "Well, I need to report this person to the police. Always work on your quirk, and you'll become a great hero one day. Maybe one day you'll return the favor from today. I will count on your support." All Might then flexed his knees and jumped into the air, throwing everything that wasn't firmly on the ground flying because of the force of his jump. Before delivering the bad guy, he was going to stop on one of the roofs to rest for a while and get his strength back. All Might was in a hurry and forgot to tie down the bottles. They hit the ground below just before he got to the roof. He wouldn't understand this until much later. When he went back in with Izuku, he was shaking with excitement and had a big grin on his face that was hidden by his mask but could be seen through his almost closed eyes. "I just met All Might, and he told me I could be a great hero someday. Don't think about Monday. I am now beginning my new routine." He yelled happily in his head as he began to sprint at his top speed, which was much faster than someone who didn't have a special ability that could make them move faster. He laughed happily and said, "Today is the best day ever. Izuku, you poor thing, you have no idea what's going on." The next time Bakugo saw Deku, he would show him what he was made of. Bakugo snarled and threw away an empty soda can in anger. "Calm down, Katsuki. Weren't you friends with him since you were kids?" asked one of his servants as he took a drag from his cigarette. The one who could extend the length of his finger said, "You won't like it if you push Midoriya too far. That guy's mysterious quirk is pretty scary after all." This person did this to reach for a cigarette without having to extend his whole arm. Katsuki glared at the person whose fingers were long. He yelled, "What the fuck are you talking about? That worthless piece of shit Deku doesn't have a quirk," and kicked a bunch of bottles that had gross things in them. The other friend of his breathed out some smoke. "He does have a quirk, Katsuki. We don't just know the nature of it." When Matsuda tried to punch him once in the stomach, all the bones in his hand broke along with dislocating his wrist, and Matsuda is made of stone. And with how many times to interact with each other, I would have thought you would notice how easy it is for him to intimidate others with just a look, and how he always seems to know where everyone and anything is. Katsuki growled and then laughed in mockery. He refused to believe that someone with a quirk would not show it off. "Yeah, right, as if. Matsuda is a jerk who probably made up the story to avoid embarrassing himself. I'm sure he hurt himself in some way. And for the other things, it must have been coincidences or something to do with his martial arts," he said. Deku didn't get a quirk when they were 4 years old, and rumors about him having one only started 2 years ago. It was clear that a quirk could not show up at that age. Instead, Katsuki thought about something else because he was tired of being mad at someone he didn't think was important. He turned around, but didn't see the scary pile of sludge that suddenly rose from the ground. "And what have I told you about smoking when I'm around? That's going to make me look bad, so fucking stop it, you moron." Invisibility cloaca with a powerful quirka. But his friends did. "What the fuck? Katsuki, look out, huh?" Toshinori Yagi sighed as he rested his back against the railing of the building's rooftop. He had done this to give himself a few more minutes to use One for All and deliver the bad guy without telling anyone his secret. Finding someone to take over his power was becoming such a top priority that it was taking his attention away from more important things. This was shown by the fact that that low-level bad guy was able to get away with it for hours. To be honest, you couldn't really blame Toshinori for it. Ever since his fight with that man 5 years ago, he felt the need to give his power to someone who wasn't as limited as he was. He had to do this before that man healed from his injuries and tried to take back control of Japan. Because he was weak and limited right now, he couldn't afford to get into a fight with that man without giving up something he might later regret. Was the reason he came to Japan, to find someone to take over his power. He didn't care if they had a quirk already or not. Because there were so many people living in Japan, the US, China, and India, those were the countries with the highest number of quirk users. That's why All Might thought those were the best places to look for a second leader. Even more so since he was going to teach at UA from the following year on. He hoped to find someone great enough to use his power. Because they would all die if he didn't. An explosion went off, making a lot of noise. Toshinori jumped to his feet and looked where the explosion came from. Then he noticed that he didn't have any heavy things in his pockets. He looked down and his eyes grew wide when he saw that the bottle with the sludge villain was missing. This can't be happening. The explosion could be heard over the music Izuku was listening to. He was almost at the point where he had to turn around and go back to his house for the second part of his run. He woke up and changed his path, starting to run in the direction where the sound of the explosion had come from. Even though he had already seen the pro heroes on patrol this morning, he wasn't going to miss the chance to do it again. It only took him a few minutes, during which time a few more explosions could be heard, to get to the scene of the disaster. When he saw how many people were there, looking into the street that was full of broken glass and burning asphalt, his eyes grew bigger. He was able to make out the heroes trying to handle the situation, even though there were a lot of people watching. As he had expected, they were the same ones from this morning. It was hard to miss them. From one end of the street, Death Arms was stopping people from getting too close to the danger zone, and from the other end, MT Lady was doing the same thing. Backdraft was doing his best to keep the fires from getting worse, and Shinran Kamui was using his wood powers to lessen the damage. This is when he saw the bad guy. His eyes grew big when he realized it was the sludge bad guy from 30 minutes before. He was able to get away from All Might again. He thought, this guy must be really good, when he saw that none of the heroes were trying to fight him. He didn't understand why for a second. His sludge form probably protects him from physical attacks, so Death Arms can't hurt him much. Since Shinran Kamui's powers come from wood, the explosions the bad guy is making would quickly defeat Kamui if they got into a fight. Backdraft can't fight, so all he can do is try to keep the fires under control. Finally, it looks like MT Lady can't control how big she gets, and she can't do anything about it because the street is too big. Hey, why are the heroes not fighting the villain? A schoolboy got caught. The villain is using his quirk to cause the explosions and the heroes cannot act in fear of harming him. When Izuku heard this, his eyes got bigger, and he focused more on the villain's form. He gasped when he saw the villain's sludge covering the form of Katsuki Bakugo, the person he hated the most in the whole world. Bakugo's eyes, which were normally filled with pride and disdain, were now filled with pain and despair as he begged for help. It didn't even occur to Izuku. When Toshinori got to the scene, he saw the boy from earlier running madly toward the bad guy, ignoring everyone else's yells to stop. This made his already sunken eyes widen even more. That jerk. Why in the world would he do that? His strange way of seeing things won't help in this case. He's going to kill himself, and I can't stop him. Oh, I'm so weak. I'm mad, he told himself as he stood there helpless. There wasn't much longer those feelings would last, though. Listen to Skillets. Hero. Bakugo. Izuku yelled as he ran faster than he ever had before toward them. He didn't care about how hot the flames were or how much trash was on the street. He stayed fast and avoided them. In fact, he was going faster and faster, which surprised people who were sharp enough to notice. You. The sludge villain yelled with a growl as he cocked his glowing fist back. Katsuki couldn't believe what he saw when he saw Izuku running toward him with a worried look on his face. Izuku turned his face into a glare and focused his king's will on the sludge villain to scare him. The villain seemed to stumble out of nowhere as he hesitated, and his fist stopped glowing with the power of his hostage's quirk. The pro-heroes were the only ones who noticed, and they quickly figured out that the boy running toward the bad guy must have done whatever made the bad guy stop attacking. Then, to shock everyone even more, Izuku activated armament on his legs, covering them with the black substance as he bent his right knee when his right foot hit the ground. He continued to run, suddenly propelling himself forward at a speed 10 times faster than before, leaving a crater 10 feet wide and 2 feet deep where he had stepped with his right foot and sending shockwaves through the air as he suddenly sped up. In his way, he was also cutting a trench out of broken concrete. What the hell? When he saw this, he thought, All Might. That much power is more than enough to beat One for All at 25%. What the hell does this kid's quirk look like? It only took Izuku a blink of an eye to close the gap between him and the sludge villain, and he grabbed the bad guy and glared him in the eyes. He yelled, I'm not going to let you hurt him anymore. His voice could be clearly heard even though his mask covered it. He turned his left arm behind him and swung it forward, burying it up to his forearm into the shape of the bad guy and grabbing Bakugo by his clothes. When Katsuki felt Izuku grab his clothes, he glared at him. Why are you doing this, Deku? When Izuku looked at Katsuki, he looked at her. He told her, shut up, you idiot, and then he used armament on his left arm. Katsuki's eyes grew wide with shock as he saw this. Izuku quickly pulled his knees in toward his body and pressed the soles of his feet into the bad guy. Then he kicked out with both legs, separating himself and pulling Bakugo away from the bad guy. The bad guy was sent flying backwards a few dozen feet, screaming in pain. Izuku flipped backwards to get control of his body in the air. When he landed, he skidded backwards and broke more concrete as his feet dug into the ground. He threw Bakugo to the ground without any ceremony while glaring at the bad guy who was rubbing the spot where he had kicked him. He could see that the bad guy was healing by adding more sludge to the wounds. I thought it would be impossible to hurt him physically, but I did it. Was it because of the weapons? The other pro-heroes there were thinking the same thing, but he didn't know it. The cat growled at Deku as he stood up from the floor and looked at him. As Izuku slowly moved into the first position of his fighting style, he looked at him with his eyes. We might hate each other, Bakugo, but let me remind you that my dream is to become a hero, Izuku said. His voice was muffled, but it was easy to understand because armament was covering his right arm. It's a hero's duty to put his life in the line to defend those that can't do it for themselves. That, and because your eyes were honestly calling for help. When All Might was being trained to take over One for All, he felt like his predecessor had just hit him with all her power. His heart felt touched by the boy's words, and he smiled happily as he watched the boy launch himself forward again, this time with even more speed and power than the first time. He saw the kid dodge the sludge villain's attacks almost carelessly, not slowing down at all. Instead, the kid shot himself into the air, dodging even more sludge tentacles, and then popped up right above the villain with his fist cocked back. Armament hockey. Hammer arm. After that, the boy punched the bad guy so hard that his fist made a shockwave of displaced air and a crater as wide as the street and as deep as All Might was tall when he used One for All. The bad guy was knocked out, and sludge was all over the place. When All Might saw the boy standing over the badly hurt bad guy, his right arm was smoking from the force of the punch, he couldn't help but smile even bigger. Toshinori Yagi didn't pay attention to the crowd's cheers as they rushed forward. He stood there with his legs still while his whole body shook with happiness and excitement. I found him. I've found him at last. Got ready, Izuku Midoriya. The real beginning of the rest of your life has just begun, and you have no idea it. With a blank look on his face that could be seen because his breathing mask was hanging off of his neck, Izuku walked backwards almost mechanically. This was because he was so happy and excited that his body and face couldn't show it. This was all because he saved Katsuki from the sludge villain a few minutes ago. They were telling the truth when they said that it didn't matter if they got along or not. If Izuku saw someone having problems they couldn't solve on their own, he would do everything he could to help them. That's what heroes did, and Izuku needed to get in that frame of mind if he wanted to become a great one, which he did a long time ago. He has always thought this way, even before he got his quirk. When he thought about his quirk, he remembered how one of his increased power punches had hit the sludge villain. The pro heroes told him they liked him and didn't like him, but they also said that the sludge villain wasn't really hurt by blunt force. The fact that Izuku beat him using this trick caught everyone off guard and made them wonder if his quirk was more than just making him stronger. Izuku knew that his quirk was more than that, but he hadn't said more because he thought that the armament part was just that, a very powerful way to improve all of his physical abilities. But when he saw that it could hurt quirk users who weren't vulnerable to those attacks, he realized that there was even more to it than that. Because armament came from the still unknown energy running through his body, it wasn't a big surprise, but it was still strange. It looked like he needed to learn more about his oddity. After everyone had praised him and, strangely enough, Katsuki for their strong quirks, they and the crowd of civilians were led away so that the heroes could quickly start fixing the damage from the fight and the sludge villain's attack. Katsuki yelled at him when they left that he didn't need his help and that his quirk was still stronger than his. Izuku had only waved him off and then walked away without looking back. When Izuku thought about that, his eyebrow moved. "Dude, I can't wait until we start hero training at you. So I have a good reason that doesn't break my rules to give that ungrateful son of a. I am here." When All Might reached Izuku from the edge of the complete mantra field, it only took 2 quick blinks of the eyes. That gave Izuku a second to think about how fast All Might was. He took a deep breath and thought, that speed is crazy. His eyes grew wide in shock as the rest of his mind caught up with what he had been seeing and thinking about. "All Might, what are you doing here?" In a loud laugh, All Might put his fist on his hips. "I wanted to talk to you, young Midoriya-kun," he told him as he looked down at him. His smile grew as he realized that Izuku was surprised by his presence, not his sudden appearance. The part of his quirk that let him sense things seemed strong enough to pick him out when he was moving at 70% speed. Any way you look at it, it was really impressive. Izuku's eyes got even bigger as he thought about it. He was so excited that he almost squeaked out his question, "You wanted to talk to me? About what?" He looked up at the number 1 hero with stars in his eyes. Izuku thought he was going to pass out. He saw his idol twice in one day. Now, it looked like that idol had gone out of his way to find him so he could talk to him. Now it was official. Best day at any time. He knew his name too. Someone needs to pinch him because this can't be real. Earlier, when you ran up to the sludge bad guy to save that kid. Izuku's eyes got bigger at the serious tone of his voice, but he still had a brave smile on his face. "Your legs moved on their own, right?" You saw the pleading expression on his face. His eyes filled with despair and you ran to help him even though you saw that professional heroes with more experience than you couldn't do anything. Am I correct? Izuku's eyes got bigger as All Might talked. Izuku stuttered for a second after he was done, then quickly nodded his head. He felt better about himself as he spoke. Yes. That's exactly what happened. His eyes got that determined look that let All Might know he was sure. I will never stand by idly and watching if I know I am able to do something to help, no matter how little or insignificant it is. Yes. I saw that in the way you moved without hesitation and heard it in your words you said to that boy whom you saved even though there was bad blood between you two. You moved in to save him because he needed help and it was the right thing to do, he said with a voice full of joy. It made Izuku blush with shame, and he got a huge grin on his face. Earlier I told you that you could become a great hero if you continued training your body and quirk as you have been obviously doing. But now I know that you can become the greatest hero in history. Even greater than I. When Izuku looked up at All Might, he stopped moving. He asked with a smile and a strained voice, What are you talking about, All Might? He laughed out loud in shock. Izuku was sure, there's no way I can become stronger than you. That's just not possible. Yes, Haki was a very strong ability, but it was limited by how much his body, mind, and spirit could grow. Izuku wasn't crazy enough to think that there was a limit to his abilities that he couldn't cross because of the way his body worked. He thought that All Might was much more powerful than him and could do anything. All Might smiled to himself. That's where you are wrong, young Midoriya. Why, you ask, for I have seen that you already have the best mindset a hero could have. One of selfness and willingness to put your life in the line for the sake of others. And if that wasn't enough, you have a very powerful and peculiar quirk that not only allows you to sense everything around you, but it also lets you make others hesitate and enhance your physical strength exponentially. Izuku was all red, making him look like a tomato. He stared at everything except All Might, who was looking at him with serious eyes. He was so moved, happy, and thrilled that he couldn't put words together. All Might went on talking. It's because of this that I deem you worthy to inherit my quirk and become the next symbol of peace. The one whose name and presence strikes fear on the wicked and evil doers. Izuku Midoriya, you will be next torchbearer of One for All. Izuku closed his eyes and turned his head to the side. AEH. Say what now? When Inko looked at her son, she slowly blinked. Okay, so let me get this straight. After you intervened and defeated the villain that kidnapped Bakugo-kun, something which I am still conflicted about how to feel by the way, you impressed All Might of all heroes and he offered you a chance to train with him every day for the next 10 months because he doesn't want your potential to be wasted. Did I get that right? Izuku slowly shook his head. Yes, he confirmed as he moved his weight from one foot to the other. It hurt him to lie to his mom, but the truth about his training with All Might was too sensitive for people who weren't directly involved or affected to know. He still wouldn't not tell his mother some of the truth, and thankfully, All Might got it and even agreed with him. Izuku believed that All Might was only pleased that he had agreed to his offer. Even though Izuku didn't really want power, he was aware of his limits, which meant that he might not be able to become the hero he wanted to be. One for All Might's quirk, was the answer to that problem. It was a quirk that stored power from previous bearers and could be passed on to a new bearer to store even more power and make the quirk stronger than it was before. All Might said that he would be the 9th person to hold the power. That means that when I accept the power, I will be able to be as strong as All Might, and I may get even stronger over time by carrying around even more power. And that's not even taking into account how armament can improve things or how it might affect mantra and King's will. That being said, this can't be real. Inko looked at her son with wary eyes, and the fact that he was starting to sweat a lot and his eyes seemed to be wandering didn't help. She knew Izuku was telling her the truth about train with All Might, but he wasn't telling her everything. Izuku knew he couldn't lie to her because he knew what would happen if he did would be very bad for him. This meant that whatever he wasn't telling her was because he couldn't, not because he didn't want to. Still, that didn't make her feel better about letting her son train in a way that could be very dangerous, but he let out a sigh and smiled at him. I think that's a great, 1 in a million opportunities that you shouldn't waste, Izuku. I will allow you to train with All Might as long it doesn't involve anything too dangerous and you keep your number 1 spot at Oradera. You might want to become a hero, but that doesn't mean you should slack off on your other current responsibilities to prioritize the other, she said harshly, but her proud and encouraging smile remained. When Izuku saw his mother, he smiled and gave her a bear hug. They laughed as he spun her around. He said, "Thanks, Mom. You don't know how much this means to me," after hitting her on the arm to make him put her down. She told him, "Of course I do, you big oaf," in the same voice she used when he was a baby while putting her thumb and index finger on his cheek and pulling it down. She said in a dry tone, "You still have all of those All Might posters, figurines, comics, and videos in your room. I think I know how much being offered training by your idol means to you." She then pulled his cheek away sharply, making him scream in pain. While his mother talked about Izuku's almost unhealthy obsession with the number 1 hero, he blushed in shame. He laughed nervously and scratched the back of his head as he said, yeah. I guess you're right, hee. Inko gave a cocky smirk. "I'm always right, Izuku. You better remember that." All of a sudden, Izuku's mother started laughing so hard that a bead of sweat ran down his forehead. Izuku had no idea that his sweet and beautiful mother, Inko, was already planning how she would use his unquestionable future fame as a hero when he became a professional. She could be scary at times when she worried about him. Because he impressed All Might so much that the greatest hero wanted to train him, Inko knew that Izuku would be great in the future and that she should invest in him. Inko had become a businesswoman over the past 10 years. Because of this, Inko had to spend money to get what she wanted. And Inko really only wanted 3 things. 1. She wanted her son to reach his goal of becoming a hero. 2. He wanted to always have enough money to enjoy her hobbies without worrying about money. And 3. She wanted lots of grandchildren to spoil. She knew that Izuku was making good progress toward his goals, and she had already reached her second goal. Her third goal depended on Izuku, but she wasn't too worried about it because she knew how girls felt about strong, caring, and good-looking guys like Izuku. That night, Izuku went to sleep thinking about what it would be like to train with All Might and the strangely creepy giggles that would come from his mother's room out of the blue. He would shiver with fear every time he heard them, wondering if his mother's strange habit had turned into a way to scare her defenseless and innocent sons. As Katsuki Bakugo lay on his bed with his hand behind his head, he glared at the ceiling of his room. He was so angry that his lips were curled into a snarl and he was growling. The only thing that kept him from losing it was his mother's threat. Damn that nerd, Katsuki thought this out loud in anger as he remembered everything that day. How easy it was for that sludge bad guy to kidnap him and how that bad guy stole control of his body and used his quirk to cause trouble. The first one made Katsuki angry, while the second one wasn't really bothering him. That, and the fact that Izuku Midoriya was the one who saved him. And his quirk was that black stuff that covered his arms and legs. It made him strong enough to knock out a bad guy with one punch whose quirk made them pretty much immune to physical attacks. Katsuki's hands got hot because he was angry, and smoke began to trail behind his head. That jerk also had the nerve to keep something that strong hidden for so long. He was very angry that Izuku had been able to do that. Katsuki had heard that Izuku did strange things that made it seem like he had a quirk, but he had never seen it for himself. He thought that the school was exaggerating and that Izuku was telling everyone that to make them treat him like he was important. But now that Katsuki could see it for himself, he realized something that made him swear a lot. Right now, Izuku was much stronger than him. Without a doubt, what happened today proved that. That was something Katsuki just couldn't accept. There was someone his age who was stronger than him. Even less if that person found out about his quirk a long time after he did and wouldn't use it out of some silly sense of honor that held them back. Katsuki was so mad about it that he wanted to blow up. It didn't help that Izuku had ignored him completely when he confronted him after the professional heroes told them to leave so they could deal with the damage from the sludge villain's attack. You jerk, don't you dare think you're better than me now. Katsuki made a face. Deku, just wait. I'll crush you until you die to show you who has the best fucking quirk between us. Asking, why are we here again? Izuku put his index finger and thumb over his nose to cover it. He was at Dagoba Municipal Beach Park at the moment. A lot of trash had piled up, and the smell of trash mixed with the salty air of the ocean was so bad that Izuku could hardly stand it. All Might had still chosen this spot as the spot where they would meet. When we talk about the main hero, because we're going to clean it up and bring it back to its former glory while we teach you how to use One for All, said Toshinori Yagi, who Izuku still knew as All Might. He was in his true form, which was an overly skinny man with sunken eyes and a face. He was wearing loose clothes to make up for the fact that he had changed when he used One for All and gotten bigger, making him even taller. As Izuku already knew about One for All, he didn't need to hide the fact that he had 2 forms or that his injuries were making it hard for him to do certain things. He wanted to give up his power quickly so that the new torchbearer could learn how to use it effectively and forever. This made it easier for him to explain why he was on the run. With a nod, Izuku said, that makes sense. Actually, seeing this place in such a sorry and disgusting state made him want to do something about it because he knew it used to be very beautiful. In any case, being a hero was about more than just fighting bad guys and having cool powers. In the past, heroes also helped with plain tasks like this one. Am I going to get One for All right away, or do I need to train first? Izuku asked in a serious tone. He was familiar with quirks that made the user stronger physically. The armament aspect of Haki was a great example of this. He knew that if his body couldn't handle the strain of enhancement, One of two things could happen. 1. His body would break from using that much power, or 2. He wouldn't be able to use the power at all. This is what happened to him because he couldn't get any better with armament until he trained his body enough to handle it. Toshinori rejected the idea with a shake of his head. Normally, that would be the case, but, he began to say as he turned to examine Izuku's body. The boy was working out in clothes that were light and airy for the summer, which showed off his muscles. All Might could see that those muscles weren't just for looks. They were meant to be used. He didn't need to make sure because he had already seen what the kid could do 2 days before. Considering that you have been training your body to handle the stress of your own quirk, I'd say that right now you are ready to receive One for All to start getting used to the amount of power it gives you. Stockpiling more power will come after you have managed to successfully handle 100% of One for All's current output. Izuku gave a nod. I get it. Just because my body is ready to handle the power doesn't mean it will be used to it. That means I will have to gradually increase the percentage of power I use so that I don't get hurt by the stress of using it. Unlike my quirk, I doubt One for All lets you know when too much power is too much power before you break bones and tear muscles, I guess, Izuku thought as he grabbed his chin. He could now ignore the smell around him because he had more important things to think about. There was blood running down the corners of Toshinori's mouth as he smiled. That's right, we don't want you to hurt yourself too much outside of basic strength, speed, durability, and stamina training, he said. He looked at Izuku for a moment. His muscles tensed up all of a sudden, and he struck a pose. Okay, let us waste time no more, young Midoriya. It's the moment for you to inherit One for All. As Izuku looked up at All Might, he stiffened and squared his shoulders. The man's words were enough to take his mind off the strange change he had just gone through. I'm ready to do whatever it takes, All Might. I will do my best not to let you down. All Might picked him out of millions of people to carry the torch of his power and become the next leader of peace, and Izuku was going to do everything he could to do this job well. All Might gave Izuku's answer a thumbs up and laughed his loudest laugh yet, which seemed to get him pumped up. That's the spirit. Now, he stopped talking and pulled a string of hair out of his head with his index finger and thumb. He gave it to Izuku with a flourish that was both over the top and not necessary. Eat this. Izuku opened his eyes. What? If you want to get One for All, you have to eat the current's bearer DNA, and hair is the cleanest part of my body you could eat, he said, pushing the string of hair into Izuku's hand. Izuku blinks again and then slowly nods. Even though it seems strange, that makes a lot of sense, Izuku said after taking a moment to look at the blonde hair he was holding in his finger. After a while, he sighed and reluctantly put it in his mouth, making saliva so that he could swallow it without any problems. He could barely feel it because of this, but the thought of having willingly swallowed All Might's hair made him gag. It wasn't cool that it came from his idol, it was still gross. Now, your body needs a few hours to break down my hair and give you access to One for All. In the meantime, All Might suddenly changed into his true form as he began to cough up blood. Let's talk about your own quirk. I know that you can use it to sense things around you, enhance your body and somehow distract your foes by I want you to tell me everything you know about your quirk, so we can start hypothesizing on how it will affected by One for All. Because of how it works, Izuku named his quirk Haki, which means ambition. It gives me energy that grows by making my physical and mental abilities stronger, which lets me do. Izuku told All Might everything he knew about mantra, armament, and King's Will from his quirk over the past 10 years. All Might paid close attention and didn't speak up while Izuku was talking. He only nodded his head to show that he understood and hummed to himself while thinking. Toshinori gave Izuku a sharp nod when he was done, which took almost 30 minutes. Okay, I think I understand your quirk well enough from what you told me, All Might said, making it easy for himself to hide his shudder. If you only looked at Haki and its 3 parts, you could see how powerful Izuku was. With that alone, Izuku would have had no trouble getting into the top 10 in the heroes list. When One for All was added to the total, it really scared him. It's necessary, Yagi thought in a grim way. He was sure that the world needed someone even stronger than All Might to deal with the threats that were coming. Even though Izuku would have to wait a long time before his name and presence alone would be enough to keep bad people away, Toshinori was sure that one day there would be an era of peace and prosperity for all people, with Izuku being the one who started it and kept it together. All Might also wasn't worried about making Izuku too strong and turning him into a bad guy. You may ask why. Because there was no way in hell that someone who jumped in to help someone they didn't like just because they looked like they needed it would use that trait to hurt other people or be selfish. Toshinori didn't worry about that at all. All Might spoke to Izuku with a bloody grin on his face. Since One for All stores physical power, I doubt it will have any effect on Mantra and King's Will at all. However, those parts of your quirk are already very strong. The armament part, on the other hand. He paused for a moment to think before continuing. When you used it to save young Bakugo 2 days ago, was that the limit to how much you could enhance yourself with it? As Izuku thought about what had happened, he rubbed his chin in thought for a minute. He really didn't remember much because everything had happened so quickly and without thinking, but thankfully it was enough to answer All Might's question. He waved his hand around in a not great way. I would say I could go about 1/10 further enhancement, give it or take it. Toshinori smiled and nodded to show that he understood. More blood started to come out of the corners of his mouth. That means that you will be able to use 35%, at the most, of One for All's maximum output right off the bat when no enhanced by armament hockey. With that in mind, our best bet would be to increase your base physical capabilities while training you to get used to how One for All feels and slowly increasing how much you can use. Since the strength of hockey grows as you do, we will be also training that as we go. After that we can look into using armament hockey and One for All at the same time. That's when Izuku finally understood that All Might was not only incredibly strong, but also incredibly smart, which made him even more amazing and scary in his eyes. Izuku was glad there wasn't another bad guy as smart and powerful as All Might. Someone as strong as All Might but without his beliefs and morals. He got chills just thinking about the possibility. As Izuku and Toshinori kept talking, they thought about the different things Izuku would be able to do once he trained with One for All. They also shared training ideas and concepts in order to come up with the best program for Izuku, making sure to include time to clean the beach as controller training for One for All. They had to add in the time Izuku would spend studying and meditating at school because hockey also needed to train his brain in order to grow. This is what happened in the end. Monday through Saturday. Time to sleep 9 p.m. to 4 a.m. Running with weights 4 o'clock 5 a.m. Strength, speed, and endurance training 5 a.m. to 7:30 a.m. School 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. Train to be in charge of everything 3:30 p.m. to 7 p.m. Time to study, do homework, or meditate 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. Sundays. Day of recovery. But this plan was even more intense than the one he had before he met All Might. Izuku was ready and excited for it. Izuku knew it wouldn't be easy and that the desire to give up would grow stronger every day, but he knew how important it was to finish what he and All Might had set out for him to do. Getting to a level of strength that made him worthy of being All Might's successor was his job. The program they were going to follow was written on a piece of paper. Toshinori held it up and said, "This is the basic version. We're going to make it more detailed as we go along by adding more things as we reach our goals on the go." Toshinori also told them, "You will also need to talk to your mother about the best diet to get the most out of this program. I know you can handle it. Getting you used to One for All, controlling it, and increasing your output is the most important part of the program. That's why we're going to spend more time on." He started to speak but stopped when he saw Izuku suddenly stiffen up. Young Midoriya. He held up his hands and Izuku looked up at him with wide eyes. I think my body has assimilated One for All. It feels a lot like the energy hockey gives me Buddha, while hockey energy feels like water flowing through my whole body in steady and powerful, but controlled manner. This energy feels like tightly coiled lightning centered in my core, content to stay like that but ready, happy and excited at the prospect of being released. All Might gave this a raised eyebrow. Truly, to me, One for All feels like I have to clench my buttocks and scream in my heart, smash. When the time comes to use it, I know that One for All manifests differently from user to user, but the effects and how it feels is always the same. Perhaps it has to do with the mindset you have acquired due to the effects your quirk has on your psyche, Toshinori thought as he scratched his chin. As he buffed up again, he shrugged and smiled with joy. No matter. Let's see what you've got. As Izuku smiled, he slowly began to tap into the coiled lightning that was on his core, using his knowledge of how to control energy to bring it out. As greenish-blue lightning started to come from all over Izuku's body, the smell of burned ozone slowly took over the smell of the trashed beach. Izuku's skin started to turn an orange color, and many glowing red power veins started to show up on it. At the same time, the sand below started to rise and swirl around him, and strong winds started to come from around him. Izuku could only shake his head and stare at his hands as All Might laughed out loud. He knew for sure that the next 10 months would be the most fun and interesting he's had in a long time. After 10 months, Toshinori walked around the Dagoba Municipal Beach Park and thought about how different it looked now than it did 10 months ago. He could really tell that he was in a different place because the sun was going down over the horizon, hiding half of it, and the sky was already changing from day to night. He could see why this place was so popular with people in the past. It got its appeal back thanks to his work and the work of the young man who was watching the sunset from further out on the beach, where the salty water reached his calves. After 10 months of hard, non-stop training, Izuku had changed in a big way. In this case, he was now 6 feet tall, and his hair had grown a bit longer and become more spiky. It was also interesting to see that even though his muscles were getting more defined, he wasn't as buff as he used to be. He found that this was because his muscles had gotten denser instead of bigger. He wouldn't have been against getting as strong as All Might, but he thought it would make him less comfortable. He liked having a lean body because it made bad guys think he wasn't as strong as he really was. After Izuku told him about this, Toshinori understood why it made sense. When Toshinori looked at Izuku's back again, he smiled with pride and happiness. He was amazed at how dedicated and responsible the team was. They stuck to the program to the letter and didn't even complain when they didn't get enough sleep or when the workouts got harder, more intense, or more punishing. He did it all with a determined look in his eyes and a grin on his face. All Might thought it was his new smile because he had seen him do it so many times in the past 10 months. People often copied those around them, and it happened even more when they looked up to that person. Because Izuku stuck to the plan and gave his training his all, he reached a level that was far above what All Might had thought was possible, but which they had secretly hoped for. He also cleaned up the whole beach a week before the UA day of the entrance exam. The city government had sent trucks to pick up the last of the trash so it could be thrown away or recycled. He could still hear them. Izuku quickly cocked his head back, made fists out of his hands, flexed his biceps, and let out a roar that was as loud as he could. He had greenish-blue lightning coming out of him, and black armament hockey showed up all over his body. The parts of his body that weren't covered by it turned orange, and red lines of power showed up all over him. The wet sand and water around him exploded outwards as an expanding shockwave from Izuku made a loud noise like air being suddenly moved around. Oh my! Oh my! Toshinori got excited by what he was seeing, and all of a sudden he turned into his All Might form and flexed his muscles while grinning. Goodness! He yelled, and drops of sweat ran down his forehead. He could feel Izuku's king's will leaking out of him. Although All Might knew that Izuku would need all the energy he had right now to use that part of hockey effectively against him, the crushing weight of Izuku's will was both amazing to feel and a challenge that he should rise to. After a short time, Izuku calmed down, and he turned around and started walking back towards All Might. First, the heavy feeling of King's will went away, and then the trails of armament hockey and Izuku's one for all appeared. As Izuku finally got close to All Might, the water in the sea slowly calmed down and returned to normal. He looked up at All Might with a smile while panting a little because he was still high on adrenaline. I did it, All Might, he told Toshinori with a smile as he raised his fist. That you did, young Midoriya, he replied, doing the same thing. He then fist bumped Izuku hard and smiled as his successor didn't even move, showing that even his normal form wasn't anything to laugh at. You performed almost impossibly beyond my expectations and surpassed our set goals even before the time limit. I can say without a single sliver of doubt no one is worthier of bearing the torch of One for All. It was hard for Izuku to keep his nose from running when his idol gave him sincere praise. Tears slowly started to fall from the corners of his eyes. Also, it wasn't said, but Toshinori got to know Izuku very well over the past 10 months. He learned what made him unique, what drove him, and what made him amazing. That, more than his huge potential, was what made him worthy in his eyes. The reason Izuku got emotional was because he knew this was what All Might meant. Izuku eventually calmed down. He pulled his fist back and let it fall by his side. His body slumped and muscles relaxed, and he let out a sigh of relief as the adrenaline left him. He felt a little sleepy, but he still had enough energy to keep going. He smiled at his hero. Izuku smacked his right fist hard in his chest and said, "Thanks for everything, All Might. I will do everything I can to live up to your expectations and never stray from my path and the path you have given me the chance to walk on. That's a promise. I know you will do that and more, my boy. Because I chose you, and you have shown me over and over again that you are worthy. I know you will not let me down," he said with a wave of his hand that was both serious and dismissive. "For now, you have earned yourself a well-needed prolonged rest. I know that not training for a single day for you is impossible, but do your best to take it easy and get some R&R time. Use this period of time to let your body heal fully so you can be at your 100% for the UA entrance examination." He then dried himself off with a towel from his backpack, which had been sitting next to All Might's foot the whole time. "Will do," Izuku said with a nod of agreement. After that, he took his breathing mask off around his neck and put it away. He took out a bottle of water and a loose shirt without sleeves that reached his thighs. He then put the shirt on. Izuku finally put his pack on and smiled at All Might again. "Thanks again. I'll see you around, I guess." With a smile on his face, Toshinori watched Izuku walk away. He had told Izuku almost everything, but the real history of One for All, what happened to his sensei, and the threat he would have to face in the future were the only things he hadn't told Izuku. Another thing he hadn't told Izuku was that he was going to be teaching at UA from now on. He still had the embers of One for All inside him because he had only used it a few times in the last 10 months, but he was slowly losing the time he had to work on his improved form. This meant that One for All was no longer his, but Izuku's. That meant he could no longer actively work as a pro hero if he wanted to keep One for All hidden long enough to help when that man first came back. It was the cherry on top that he could keep an eye on his successor and help the next generation through it. Thank goodness, the US. The staff listened to his warning about the impending dangers, and they all agreed to make the hero program tougher and more intense, changing it in small ways to focus more on combat than other parts of being a hero. Because of the storm that was coming, it had to be done. Also, he hadn't told Izuku about this because he knew that boy with black hair and green highlights would think that he used his power to help him get into the school. Even though All Might wouldn't do something like that, that wasn't a reason for Izuku not to be worried about the chance that it might happen. The real reason was, the phone rang. He took it out of his pocket and put it back on. He looked at the screen for a short time before his face turned nervous and his whole body started shaking with fear. He took the call with a shaky sigh. Hello. Old people came from the other side. Oi, Toshinori-kun, what is this I hear that you will be teaching at UA? Finally decided to pass on One for All and settle down for once. You should have done that years ago, if you ask me, you dumb kid. Even though he was wringing his teeth, All Might managed to stutter a response. Yes, Gran Torino-sensei, sir. I will be working for UA High School as the Foundational Hero Studies teacher for Class 1A. And, yes. I have already passed on One for All. I did so 10 months ago. As a matter of fact, I have just finished training him to an acceptable level, you could say. After some silence on the other end, the old voice spoke again, but this time it was much calmer. While honoring the memory of Toshinori's mentor and Gran Torino's best friend, they both kept quiet for almost a minute. I see. Good for you, Toshinori-kun. It was about damn time. You were even older than she was when you were made her successor, Gran Torino said. Gran Torino went on after the moment was over. So, is the brat you chose any good? All Might threw his head back and began to laugh happily. Oi! Don't go around losing your mind before even I do. All Might calmed down, but he couldn't help but laugh a few times as he answered. Good, you ask. If there is one thing I am 100% sure of, Gran Torino-sensei, is that Izuku Midoriya, the ninth bearer of One for All, is easily stronger than I was when I graduated from you. And he is only 15 years old. The other end of the line was silent for almost 30 seconds, and when Gran Torino spoke, she said just one word. Damn. She knew that the only way to go to the best hero school was to come to Musudafu to be close to UA. Since she lived with her family in the Aichi prefecture, she had to make this trip. Because her family recommended the school, she was able to get in. She did great on the written test, but she was really looking forward to taking the famous practical exam at the amazing school. But what she felt bad about now was making her come on her trip by herself. While she loved her parents very much, they were sometimes too much for her to handle, which made her angry. You see, she only did that because she knew they did it because they loved and cared about her, not because they wanted to control who she was and what she did. Even better, they got the recommendation because she said in passing at dinner that she wanted to apply for the UA. They told her what they did as a present for her birthday. It might have been the best day of her life so far. That they wanted to come with her to help her get settled, see the city, and make sure she had everything she needed at the penthouse they had set up for her. Right away, she put her foot down and said she wanted to start learning how to take care of herself and that she couldn't do that if they went with her. Thank goodness her parents were smart enough to understand that she was right and that they needed to let her grow up and become a woman, since she wanted to be a pro-heroine and all. Mom, I can only blame you and your strong genes for this. She screamed in her head as she moved away from the three shady-looking men who were staring at her with sexy eyes and sick smiles. One had tentacles for arms, another had a shark-like face with teeth that matched, and the last one looked normal except for the fur on his face and what looked like sharp claws on his hands. She yelled at them, "Stay back," and put her suitcases between them to protect herself. She seemed calm on the outside, but she was freaking out on the inside. She could deal with them with her quirk, creation, but she didn't want to get in trouble on her first day in the city and risk her almost certain admission to UA. She was waiting for them to get close enough so she could hit them with the hand-to-hand skills her father taught her for just these kinds of situations. The one with fur and claws said, "Come on, Missy. Show us a good time, and we might make it worth your while." The other two nodded in agreement as they walked up. Thank goodness. Just as she was about to drop her bags and slam her knees into the man with the tentacles, a flask of water that still had some water in it jumped out and hit the man with the shark-like features in the temple so quickly that she barely had time to see it. The man was hit so hard by the flask that he was knocked out and hit the ground with a bad cut that was already bleeding. A teen her age, or maybe older, almost flew at the man with tentacles and slammed his knee into his face. Momo didn't even have time to turn around to see where the flask had come from. He then brought his elbow down and hit him on the top of the head while he was still in the air. She looked at him with wide eyes. Soon after, he grabbed the man by his tentacles, turned around, pivoted, and slammed him into the ground so hard that the man's shape was left in the concrete of the alley. She was almost gasping for air. Momo's eyes got really big when she saw the man with fur and claws come up behind the teen at a speed that she knew would be hard for even her to handle. He held out his mean claws, ready to stab him in the back with them. Even though she told him, "Watch out," it was too late for him to turn around, look at the threat, and decide how to respond. His attacker was probably just as shocked as she was when he leaned to the side without looking up and let the claw go by him without hurting him. He had just a few centimeters to spare. Without turning his head, he quickly raised his arm and hit the attacker in the nose with his elbow, breaking it. The force of the blow knocked the attacker out, and his head snapped back. The teen then did a perfect reverse roundhouse kick and then spun once with a hop. He hit the man on the temple with the back of his foot. Right away, the man fell like a bag of potatoes. Momo stared at the teen with wide eyes as he slowly let out a breath. She knew that was what people did to calm down after getting excited quickly. She blushed pretty when she saw how good-looking he was and how well-defined his muscles were. The sleeveless shirt and shorts he was wearing let her enjoy these things. She looked away and shook her head when he bent down to get his flask. "Hey, are you all right?" The sound of his voice, which she thought was lovely, made her turn to face him. But when she saw his worried green eyes, she blushed again. She also noticed that he had a little blush on his cheeks from freckles and that his spiky, curly hair went well with his sharp face. Maybe it won't be so bad after all to come here and live alone, she thought to herself before she spoke. She bowed deeply and said, "Oh, yes. I am, thanks to you." When Izuku saw this, he turned red and began waving his hands around frantically. "There's no need to thank me. It wasn't a big deal, really. I was just passing through and saw your predicament. I just had to help," he said. He chose to cut through the shadier part of the city because he was just walking home and it was getting late. The passive mantra in his haki helped him figure out what was going on right away, and he ran to help. He laughed nervously. As Izuku looked her over several times, he told himself, "Besides, it looked like you were about to do the same to them." He did this while giving her the attention of a martial artist. She looked great in her blouse, short jean skirt, and knee-high boots, but he didn't like how aged she looked. When Momo saw him looking at her, she felt embarrassed but also excited because he seemed to like what he saw. She smiled at him and rubbed her right armpit with her left hand. "Well, yeah, I couldn't use my quirk to deal with them since it is against the law to do so without a license, but I know enough to hand to get by. But seeing the speed at which the man with the fur and claws moved, I doubt it would have been as easy for me as it was for you. It didn't even take you 15 seconds to knock the three of them out," she said, also enjoying how he blushed at her ovation. I have practiced martial for more than a decade now, so dealing with men like them is easy for me since I am used to fighting others that are way better than me," he said, which was true. Before he trained with All Might, he was already stronger and more powerful than his dojo masters. However, they could still kick his behind easily because they were more experienced and knew all the techniques of their art. And it's best not to talk about his fights with All Might every 2 weeks. He was more interested in something else, she said. "So, what can you do with your quirk?" Momo raised an eyebrow at the way he asked the question, but she shrugged her shoulders instead. This made Izuku blush because her big assets were moving in interesting ways. She knew he saw this, but instead of being mad, she felt embarrassed that he did. She found it funny that he looked away, making her feel even more embarrassed, and she was strangely happy that she had that effect on him. She explained, "I can make anything out of my body's fatty tissue as long as I know what the parts are." She then raised her hand and made 2 dice that seemed to appear from the back of her hand. He said, "Whoa," and the way he looked at her hand made Momo feel a little self-conscious. "Are you telling me that if you know what an atomic is made of, you can just make one with your quirk?" He asked her in shock. She shyly turned away from his stare, which made her blush. Theoretically speaking I could, yes. But since I have to use my fat cells to create something, there is a limit to just how much, and how powerful, the creation would be. I would have to eat constantly for a long period of time while creating the parts of the bomb. And then I would have to assemble it, which would take more time. Izuku nodded to show that he got it. That makes a lot of sense. But still, holy crap. With enough time and food in your hand you can do literally anything. The world is lucky that someone with a quirk like yours isn't a villain. He left and he looked at her face. He looked her straight in the eyes and asked, "You're not going to be a bad guy, are you?" Momo laughed out loud because she saw the playful glint in his eyes and thought it was funny that he would think someone like her was a very serious threat if she turned bad. "For your information, no, I'm not planning on becoming a villain. Quite the contrary actually. I will be attending UA High School when the new school term starts," she said with a proud tone of voice. Izuku's eyes got bright. "So that means we'll see each other next week during the test," he said happily and with excitement. He saw that she was averting her eyes and shuffling her feet in nervousness when she didn't answer. "What's the matter?" I kinda got a recommendation and because of it I don't have to take the practical exam. Which means that technically I have already been accepted even if the acceptance letter hasn't been sent yet," she said anxiously. She thought he would yell at her and say she was cheating, just like her high school friends did when she told them. For some reason, the thought of this boy not liking her made her chest feel very tight. Damn, you must be more awesome than what I already thought you were. You got a recommendation to enter UA and it got accepted. I can't wait to see what you are capable of. Sorry. I'm only now realizing that I don't know your name. Mine's Izuku Midoriya. Nice to meet you, he added. For a moment, she blinked at him in shock. Then, her cheeks turned a healthy pink, and she smiled the biggest smile she had in a long time. She liked the way his cheeks looked when he looked at her. My name is Momo Yaoyorozu. Please call me Momo Midoriya-kun. Only if you call me Izuku, was his quick, almost automatic answer. They both blushed with shame when they finally understood what the other was asking, even though they had only just met. After a short time, they began to laugh. The fun lasted for a long time, and when things finally calmed down, Izuku extended his arm for her to take, and with a big flourish, he pointed out the doorway out of the alley. Well, Momo, I will have to insist on escorting you to your abode, seeing that this part of town is not the best place for a beautiful woman such as you. Momo took him up on his offer and linked her arm with his. She blushed at the compliment, but smiled when he took one of her suitcases with the hand of the arm she wasn't holding. Thank you for your kind offer, I take it very seriously. You will be doing this lady a great service by what you do, she told him as she watched him play. He yelled, excellent, and then, with a flourish, pulled out his phone after setting her bags down on the ground. But first, I believe the authorities should be notified of what this lot tried to do to you, yes. They should arrive here in a few minutes and taking our testimonies won't take more than 5 minutes. She agreed with Momo and watched as he called the police to report what happened. Momo asked him something that had been bothering her ever since they talked about her quirk. She knew they would have to wait in the alley for a little while longer. So, what's your quirk? I noticed that you only used martial arts to deal with those guys. Izuku smiled at her and raised the hand that was holding his cell phone. He still hadn't reached out to grab her bag again. She gasped when she saw that his hand was now covered in something black and shiny that looked stronger than steel. My quirk is called Hockey Ambition, and what it does Issa. Since they found out about each other's quirks, Momo and Izuku kept talking about them and their experiences with their arms still linked. They were only stopped when the police showed up a few minutes after Izuku started talking about his quirk. That night, Izuku was shocked at how easy it was to talk to Momo and how he didn't tell her anything except about One for All and his link to the number 1 hero. That was something he was only going to tell his successor when it came time for him to pick one. And finally, it was when they got to her apartment building that they saw that they had been holding hands since they had first met. For both of them, the funny looks they were getting from everyone did not help at all. Although they were nervous, they gave each other their phone numbers and promised to keep in touch often until the start of the term. Izuku felt so proud of himself for some reason that he compared it to the feeling of having finished All Might's program exactly as planned. He thought that the feeling might have been better, but he wasn't sure why. Soon after, he got to his house. Inko could only look at his blank face and faraway look for a moment before her eyes grew big. She gasped when Izuku sneaked into his room and shut the door behind him. She asked herself quietly, he hasn't been accepted yet, and he's already met a girl he likes. Then she pumped her fists in the air in a mean way. Yes, she yelled with joy. Grandbabies, here I come. Get ready to be spoiled to death by Inko Obakan.
So that's it for today. I will continue this story in next part. Till then, bye bye.